Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everybody. It's so great to see all of you. As you mentioned, I'm Ruth Dickey. I'm the Executive Director of the National Book Foundation, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to NBF Presents Friendships That Inspire. I want to begin with one piece of sad news, which is that Sigrid Nunez was not able to be with us today, which we are very sad about. But we're going to have a great conversation with Weike Wang, and we're going to talk about Sigrid, even though she's not able to be here a little bit. So I want to start with some thank yous. Many, many thanks to Natalie and Emily at the National Book Foundation. Thanks to Liz, Anna, and Stefan at the Brooklyn Book Festival, as well as the countless volunteers that make the festival possible each and every fall. Hooray and huge cheers for 20 years of Brooklyn Book Festival this year, their downtown takeover. And many thanks to Powerhouse Books, who is our bookseller, for making Sigrid's book and Weike's book available for us all today. At the National Book Foundation, we think about books and readers year-round here in our hometown and across the country with programming and book distributions in all 50 states, D.C., and Puerto Rico. We hope you'll stop by our booth, which is number 314, where we're celebrating our just-announced 2025 National Book Award long-listed titles. We have all 50 titles in fiction, nonfiction, poetry, translated literature, and young people's literature available for sale, thanks to our incredible partners at Books Are Magic. And we may or may not have a few pre-pub galleys left to give away too. So you're all invited to tune in live this year on November 19th for this year's National Book Awards ceremony, which will honor our 2025 Lifetime Achievement Award recipients George Saunders and Roxane Gay, and reveal the 2025 winners in real time. That's Wednesday, November 19th, and you can register to watch and be with us for all the excitement at nationalbook.org/awards. So today I'm honored to be joined by a member of Team Book, our friend Weike Wang, who is a 2017 5 Under 35 honoree for her debut novel, Chemistry. I'm excited to chat with Weike about her friendship with Sigrid and what it means to write in New York, and her latest brilliant novel, Rental House. If we have time and any audience members are feeling especially brave, we'd love to squeeze in some of your questions at the end before we head to the book signing table, which will conveniently be right in front of the building to the left of the stage. And now, I am delighted to introduce Weike to you. Weike is the author of Chemistry, Joan is Okay, and Rental House. She is the recipient of a PEN Hemingway Award, a Whiting Award, and was a National Book Foundation 5 Under 35 honoree. Her work has appeared in Plowshares, The New Yorker, The Atlantic, The Best American Short Stories, and has won an O. Henry Prize. She earned her MFA from Boston University and her other degrees from Harvard. She currently lives in New York City and teaches at the University of Pennsylvania, Columbia University, and Barnard College. Welcome, Weike. Would you please be willing to treat us with a little bit of your book as we get started?
Hello. Thank you, guys. Sorry again about Sigrid not being here. I know you guys are here. A lot of you are here to see her. We were texting this morning, so we are friends. But she's just not feeling a little well. And health is the most important thing nowadays. So I'll do a little bit of reading, and then I do want to talk about my friendship with Sigrid and how that started, and then we could talk about my book. We could also talk about just friendship in general and what that means for writing. I teach a lot, so I teach a lot of kids from high school to college, and friendship is a huge topic on their minds. They're always scared when I tell them as you get older, you lose friends, and they think it's the most horrifying thing in the world. So we're always talking about friendship, and I read a lot of their stories on friendship. So I'm happy to dig into that and what that means for writing. So I'll start for the beginning of Rental House, and then I'll talk a little bit about me and Sigrid, and then we can dive into conversation?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll just start at the beginning. She had started looking in winter, browsing rental sites recommended by friends who went away for long periods of summer and knew about this stuff. They knew which towns along the Cape had the cleanest beaches, which towns on Nantucket were the most kid-friendly, and which ice cream stands the Obamas frequented on the Vineyard. These tips she wrote down on a notepad. Martha's Vineyard equals Obama's equals ice cream. She'd marked kid-friendly places as ones to avoid. She and her husband of 5 years had discussed visiting the Cape before, but for 5 years had not. It was decided that this was the summer to do so. They would leave Manhattan and spend a month within walking distance of the Atlantic Ocean in a classic New England cottage with gables, shutters, and 2 beds. 2 beds so that both sets of parents could visit staggered. In the lead-up weeks, Nate spoke of staying realistic. The year prior, there'd been a pandemic. They'd forgone seeing parents or leaving the house much. He preferred the bubble, but knew that bubbles had to be left. Soon, they were in a rental car driving north. The trunk was full of food, clothes, cleaning supplies, and our gigantic 4-year-old sheepdog, Manto, sat upright in the back seat. While the idealistic vision of a trip with their parents had come from Karoo, raising a full-size sheepdog in the city had been Nate's idea. A sheepdog fulfilled a boyhood dream, the pastoral one of endless fields, and a friend about your height whose fur your small hands could sink into and who could guide you into the magical woods. Nate had grown up in a small one-story house with brown carpets. His mother had allowed 2 rats, many fish, a snake, but no dogs. Those purebreds are expensive and bougie, she'd said. Why waste money on them when there are so many strays in need? None his mother ever took in. About the name of their sheepdog, Karoo and Nate had quarreled. Manto means steam bun, said Karoo, who was bilingual and had left China as a youth. I know what it means, said Nate, who had been taking Chinese lessons ever since he realized that whenever he was with Karoo and her parents, he had no idea what was going on. So what's wrong with Manto? Asked Karoo. Nate brought up the propensity of yuppie couples to name their expensive dogs after basic starch items. The dog had come from a reputable breeder. They had been 2 years on a waiting list and paid a non-insubstantial deposit to be on that list. There was no fruit or vegetable Karoo enjoyed enough to dedicate to their dog. She would also not be giving their dog a human name like Stacy. The other possibility was huajuan, or a fancy-shaped swirled steamed bun. Nate said the word a few times, believing that he was saying the word right, but Karoo said that he was saying the word wrong, and though Nate couldn't hear where he had gone wrong, and she couldn't explain exactly either, he agreed that Manto was fine. Thank you. Should I talk a little about Sigrid?
Yeah. How did your friendship begin?
Okay, let's start from the beginning. So in grad school, I did my MFA at BU. Around this time, writing was not a path that I wanted to go on. For a long time, I was pre-med, and I did a graduate degree in epidemiology and biostatistics, thinking epidemiology, when am I gonna ever use that degree? And around that time, I also did, I was thinking, should I be a writer? And I went to the BU MFA program because it was a 1.5-year program, 1-year program in Boston, and I was already in Boston. I didn't know Sigrid then at the time. Hajin was a mentor there, and the workshop, Sigrid ran the revision workshop, so she ran this workshop where you wrote a story and you revised it. And what I really, really loved about her workshop was that she was very honest. You know, her thing was, if you're going to be a writer, you have to take an oath of poverty. And, you know, being someone who was pre-med, that's like the worst thing you could say to someone. But I thought, why not? And she was very honest with her feedback. She was very clear about what being a writer meant, and how most of the time you're really just creating the story alone and trying to figure that out. And writers mostly are solitary creatures because you're not writing a book on Google Docs together with your friend. So I really liked her honesty, and she started off as my teacher. And to my students, I'm always like, I think you obviously go into a field that you hopefully like and are good at, but I think you go into a field where you have good role models. And so, you know, medicine, you do a lot of shadowing and things like that to hopefully find a good role model. Sigrid was one of the best role models I've ever had as a writer-teacher. She showed me what it means to be committed to the craft, to be a really good reader. She's very, very well read in terms of, you know, what she's open to reading. And she's very clear about what she likes and what she doesn't like. You know, she used to say liking everything is the same thing as hating everything. There's no discrimination there. And, you know, she would say, you know, there's so many things that she would say in class that I would always remember and that I repeat to my students. She was the one that taught me you have to write to your smartest friend. She was also the one that taught me, you know, you have to make sure that the sentence is true before it's beautiful. And she really emphasized clarity and voice and humor. Sometimes she's a very funny writer, and so, but she doesn't lose any of that emotional weight. So I knew her as a teacher before I really read her. And for those of you here who have read like The Friend, The Vulnerables, I would really recommend, if you haven't already, I would recommend reading her debut novel, which is Feather on the Breath of God. That novel I read in Hodgins' migrant literature class, and it really changed my life in terms of how it taught me what is a novel, how a novel is structured. The first chapter, called Chang, is a model after an Asian American, Pan American father, and that relationship between cross-culture, cross-generational. And it's an incredible book. So I really recommend that book. I teach that book, and I sort of always want to explain why that book meant so much to me. So then from there, what I did was I bought everyone I knew a copy of that book. I forced them to read them, and then from then on, every one of Sigrid's books I've read, and it's interesting because, Sigrid also taught me that. The writer puts some of their best selves on the page. There's the writer on the page, and then there's the writer you meet in person. And so reading Sigrid over the years on the page is very different than afterwards we became friends, and it's a different kind of dynamic. After BU, I graduated, and now we share the same agent and editor and publicist, so that's interesting. So we're kind of in this family. So we have a lot of common points, and we do try to see each other every now and then for meals and stuff. So it's different because it's a different relationship that I built with her on mentorship and teaching, and obviously respect for her writing and her voice and what she taught me. So seeing Sigrid on the page in terms of how her voice has evolved from her first novel to maybe her most recent, reading her short stories, things like that, but also knowing her as a person, texting with her, things like that, complaining with her about stuff, about, the world, emailing, things like that. That's honestly a different trajectory. So in some ways, I'm sad she's not here, but I'm also felt like if she was here, I wouldn't be able to say any of this because I would just be a little bit embarrassed. But one of the things with this friendship is it did start as a teaching-student relationship, and because she was such a great role model to me, that's why I believe teaching is really important. I think writing is one of the few things where so many of my students are like, oh my God, you're either born a writer or you're not. That's not true. No one's born a concert pianist. Come on. You have to practice. And that's something that Sigrid also taught us, is that you have to practice, you have to read, you have to kind of train the muscle. And that's something I'm always conveying to my students. So in some ways, I think of my friendship with Sigrid on that student-teacher relationship as kind of part of this writing lineage. And I'm always trying to, she's not teaching anymore. She's been teaching for so long, she's not teaching anymore. But a lot of those lessons I'm trying to kind of pass on and impart to new writers and the new generation of writers. So that's my spiel about her. I would really, again, recommend reading her earlier books. There's that book, that's very good. And then a book that I also teach in a novella class called Mitts. It's about Virginia Woolf's marmoset. It's like a tiny monkey. It's very short. All my students love it because it's short, but also it's about a pet monkey, and they get to learn about Virginia Woolf. So you sort of like get everything in there, and it's kind of like an introduction to the creative mind of Sigrid. She's always like, I want to write fairy tales, but fairy tales are actually pretty hard to write, so that was sort of her entry into that point. So yeah, I really try to push her books onto other people, but that's our relationship, and I guess I hope it continues to develop.
Mm-hmm. I love No One is Born a Concert Pianist.
Yes.
I'm curious, do you and Sigrid exchange work pre-publication or involve one another in any way in your creative and writing process?
Sometimes. Mostly we just talk about how it's hard. Sigrid is one of these writers who I don't believe she shows anything to anyone unless it's completely done. So she doesn't show her agent or our agent anything or editor until she's completely finished. I remember though that when she does show things to people, it's actually entirely complete. So The Friend, which she won the National Book Prize for, when she had turned that book in, Sarah, our editor, I think said no edits, and then it was just off, and I find that to be incredibly amazing. No writer I know has no edits for certain things like that. But she also does an outline, which is completely outrageous. If you read some of her work, you're sort of like, how do you get there without outlining? But she has this amazing ability to kind of keep everything in her head. And when she keeps everything in her head, it's quite organized. And then she sort of writes to that. So yeah, I would say that we don't really exchange works. We don't workshop or anything. I think we exchange books that we like or books that we hate. So it's good to to hate and love the same things. And what we're reading at the moment, or if she'll see a book that she's interested in, she'll send it to me. So book mail is something that we do a lot, but not really editing anymore.
I love that. I love that you mentioned humor earlier, because one thing I really admire in your work and Sigrid's work is that it's so poignant and so beautiful, and it's really funny. And I'd love to hear how you think about humor when you're writing.
How I think about humor? I think it has to come a little bit naturally. Both me and her believe that humor is a good coping mechanism for some of the heavy stuff that we want to talk about. So that could be identity, that could be family crisis, that could be, loneliness. That could be sort of the disaster of the world, right? The Friend was written sort of about a Me Too moment, so there's that darkness in there. And The Vulnerables in that kind of trilogy part was written about the pandemic and sort of the loneliness of a pandemic. And I think you have to find humor in that, otherwise it would be a little bit sad, And so I think she works really hard at putting in the humor, taking it out, putting it back in. And I think neither of us are that quick when we're trying to write these things. I think it does take a lot of time, but it should come naturally. She was one of the few writers who, when I read, she was just naturally funny off the page. She and my first writing teacher, Amy Hempel, they were both very funny writers, and that was important for me to see, again, as role models, that this could be done, versus like a writer who just emphasizes you have to have gravitas on the page. It has to be completely serious. It has to be, like unfeeling in terms of, and very serious and somber. So she has a very light touch in the way that she's able to deal with heavier matters. And I did learn a great deal of that from her.
Yeah. I'm glad that you mentioned the pandemic, because both The Vulnerables is set mid-pandemic, Rental House is set immediately after the pandemic, but references it a lot. And I feel like both books really reckon with what the pandemic, how it affected us all. And I'm curious, I think it's really challenging to write about the near past.
Yeah.
And I wonder how you decided to situate Rental House in that moment in time.
Well, I came up with the idea while I think it was the tail end of the New York pandemic. If you're writing in New York, one of the things with New York is you experience a lot of things. I teach at Columbia. Recently, Columbia goes through stuff, right? As you know, you see the parades, you see their anger, you see a lot of things coming up from the young generation and what they think and what they feel. You see it very immediately. So New York, the first things hit there culturally, like for the pandemic, it's just a huge population density. So I think because it was such a crazy time period. There was, a period of 3 years where no one was traveling, and we were just sending emails and texts about how we weren't traveling. And so this idea of potentially going somewhere and traveling and fantasizing spending that time with your parents and in-laws somehow becomes magical. And so that was sort of the idea for the first half, and also following this couple, Karu and Nate, through their marriage, through that 2-vacation lens, the first with the parents, and then the second just kind of on their own. I wanted to explore this marriage over a long period of time that didn't have any kids. I think because I teach kids, I see how kids glue a family together so immediately. So I wanted to explore what that was like when you took that sort of glue out, and how a family like that connects, or maybe doesn't connect as well. So yeah, it was this idea of family staying together in that bubble in the pandemic, and what that was like. I do a lot of tutoring, so when I was, during the pandemic, I was on Zoom with kids teaching them algebra, and you could just see the parents in the background really worried, and this idea of kind of giving family space and sort of figuring out how that's going to work with people in a bubble was something I was fascinated about with Rental House. And with the vulnerables, right, it's the character is, I guess, like bird sitting. So there's a bird, and we have to sit with the bird. And so that was also happening during then. It's like, here's a free space, come live here. And so many things happen, and then the roommate comes, right? And figuring out how to kind of live together. So I think one of the things that me and Sigrid have in common sometimes when we write is we're interested in makeshift families, or families that are not necessarily part of that traditional nuclear family idea, and how to challenge that, or how to kind of see that a little bit. Because in the vulnerables, the roommate, the parrot, and the main character do form this makeshift family. And I saw a lot of that happening during the pandemic, when you sort of like cluster up with people, and you're sort of like forced into that bubble, but then you somehow figure it out. So, and in The Friend, the characters with that dog, and I love dogs too, so this idea of kind of finding makeshift companionships with animals, with neighbors, with strangers who don't become strangers after a while, that's important for both of us. Yeah.
I'm glad that you mentioned the parrot and the dog, and of course you also have Montau in this book, and both you and Sigrid write really movingly about what it means to live with animals, and how they refract and reflect your emotions, and all the ways that they are complicated and amazing.
Of course.
And I'm curious, well, I want to know, I kind of know that you have a pet, but do you have a pet for the audience? And also,
I do, yeah.
How do you think about animals as you think about writing? Because they're such central figures in all these books.
Yes.
Does Sigrid have a pet?
Oh, we've talked about this for a long time.
Okay, tell us.
Okay, I have a dog. He's named after a starch item. His name is Biscuit. But, he's 12, so he's sort of getting up there. He was my first dog. I grew up in, like a little bit traditional immigrant family where I think if you're barely surviving, why would you get a pet, right? And so I didn't really have pets, and so my current dog that I got in my early 20s was my first dog, and I don't know how any other animal is going to beat this dog. I'm sort of like, well, he just needs to live forever, I guess. Sigrid, I've asked her, I think she's had cats before. I think she's maybe had a dog temporarily, but she's much more of a cat person. In general, she's kind of cat-like. It's hard to get a hold of her. So she likes cats. But I think when you get a little bit older, sometimes it's like, who's going to take care of the animal when she's touring a lot, she's traveling. And one time we were having coffee. She's like, Weike, the only thing worth writing about is death. And I was like, great. Who's going to take care of the cat when I die? And it's like, I will, I guess. I'll try to take care of your cat. So I think when you're a little bit older, you're kind of worried if the pet, you don't want to have that pet be a burden to someone else. But she does she loves animals, she does. And all the recent books have had animals. And she did so much research on Virginia Woolf's pet monkey, so that goes to show you how much love she has for animals, and this idea of she's always been very interested in fairy tales, and fairy tales have these magical animals in them.
Yeah, I love this section in the journal was all about the parrots and the parrot sanctuary and how many birds outlive their human owners, and totally fascinating.
Yes.
Clearly a deep love for animals behind it. One thing that you mentioned earlier was New York, and I know both of you live in New York, and I wonder how you think that affects the role of New York in your writing and in your literary community.
Yeah. I learned how to write really in Boston in college. New York is a kind of a different sphere. I wish Sigrid is here to answer this question. I think she's much more entrenched in the New York writing scene, and she's been here so long in terms of who she knows. But New York has been very inspiring in terms of the kind of culture and creativity that you're exposed to here. You have access to a lot of things. You have events like this where you get to meet a lot of readers. You just have kind of a plethora of opportunities to develop. I don't know how many, I teach at Barnard and Columbia. So every single one of my students wants to either write screenplay, books, I don't know, to be a journalist. This idea of the written world, the word is really powerful in New York. So that's important. And I also think it takes a lot to live in New York. It kind of grinds down your spirit in some ways. And so there's this sense of putting a lot of that into a book. So in Rental House, they're trying to leave New York because it's so noisy and cacophonous, and they go to a place and it's so quiet that they think probably everyone died or something like that, versus like coming to New York and this pulse of life. I teach at BU this fall and next year, and I take the Amtrak there, and I go to this, there's an Airbnb in Coolidge Corner, and it's a city, but it's incredibly quiet, and I think I just have lived in New York for like 10 years now. It's a little bit eerie to be somewhere that quiet. So I find New York perpetually inspiring in both the good and bad, and I think that friction is really helpful, right? This idea of like living in the city, but also being exposed to a lot of different things. One of the great things about New York in terms of friendship is if you live in New York, someone is coming to see you. Someone's coming to see you, someone's coming to stay with you. You are not for a lack of friends who want to crash with you, and they want to be like, where should we go for the best thing? Where should we go? I've stood in line for so many pizzas, and I don't even like pizza, right? But they like pizza, so we are standing in line for that pizza. Or like where to go to take the best picture for something, which bridges. So one of the best things about New York is I've made so many great friends here. And also I've stayed connected with friends who want to come to the city, and you just sort of see them on a regular basis. So that's what's really great about the city. It's not perfect, right? But through that imperfection, everyone wants to see the city in some way, and experience it. And, it has actually, I think, strengthened a lot of my friendships living here. So
that's such an interesting point. It's true. Everyone visits New York.
Yeah.
I've been here 4 years now, and not many people visited me in Seattle, but everyone visits New York. Mm-hmm. So as I mentioned in your introduction, you were a National Book Foundation 5 Under 35 honoree for your debut novel, Chemistry. And I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about what that recognition early in your writing career felt like, or what it meant to you.
I think that's really important. It was you're with a cohort of 4 people, right, 5 people total, and you're kind of part of this group every year that there's more people being inducted. And I still talk with the people that get nominated years after, and maybe it's a book that I've blurbed or I've read. So you have that community. It's also great to, the writing world, any world where you're kind of working at a certain level is quite small. So it's really good to have that community of writers. It was obviously very encouraging to have the award early on, just to know that you're doing something, you're making a difference. I think it was important that if, I don't know, an Asian American girl out there, Chemistry was the first book of literary fiction that they read, written by an Asian American, that would be great, right? So I think sometimes that sort of representation is important. It's not the most important thing, right? It's not the only thing in writing, but so much of writing is that. I always tell students writing is experimentation, you need to have fun, but for certain people, the responsibility is also representation. So you sort of have both those things. And that was really important early on, too.
I'm curious because this Rental House is your third book, and I'd love to hear a little bit about how the process of writing it and celebrating it in the world has been similar to or different from Chemistry and Jane is Okay.
Yeah, every book is different. I think I try to do different things in each book. I think I've had a lot of people ask me, is there going to be a sequel to X, Y, and Z? And no, I'm not writing a sequel. But this idea of trying out different forms. The current book that I'm working on is about a different kind of friendship. It's very short. It's not like this book that was in 2 parts, but it has a different voice, So I think every book is very different, and bringing it out into the world, seeing the response. And social media makes things so different, right? And sort of having that connectedness. So, yeah, I sort of take it as I go. I've asked, like, to Sigrid's question of does she ever write to an audience? She would say no. I don't think she ever writes to an audience. She writes to the smartest friend. And sometimes, Sigrid is so funny. Sometimes she's like, if you don't like my book, don't read it. And she's very much like, I'm going to write what I want, right? And I think that's a really important and also privilege to have, that no one tells Sigrid what to write. And that's important. You shouldn't tell any writer what to write, right? And she explores what she wants to write to her full volition. So I think each book, I think about where I am in terms of writing and what I want, what voice I want to write to, and we go from there. Yeah.
What were you aiming for with Rental House?
With Rental House, it's in the third person. It's my first book in the third person. I really wanted to explore this interracial relationship that I don't think gets explored that often, but is so ubiquitous, right? So I wanted to explore that dynamic and what that's like in, I don't know, Trump America, right? My parents grew up under the Cultural Revolution. Now they live under President Trump. I mean, there's just this like full circle here of kind of like you progress, but then you're sort of in a completely different world, but that's also kind of similar. I was interested in this kind of just intergenerational strife and progress and what that means. I'm always interested in that sort of marriage and family. The idea of family and friendship is important, this idea of chosen family versus given family. I'm the only child, and so really, if you think about it, I had no baseline friend. I didn't have like a sibling, right? So like making friends was one of my only routes of communicating with the outside world. I spoke to my parents in Chinese, so friends were the only people I spoke English with. And so friendship, that idea, that concept is essentially family to me, because I only have my parents here, right? So those are my given family. But then to have friends and to have to choose those friends and make friends and sustain friendships was incredibly hard and something I had to learn. And so here I'm thinking about in Rental House this idea of given family, right? Nate and Carew both have their families that they come from, chosen family, each other, but also their chosen friendships. Are they, they're married, but are they good friends still? And then the second half of the book, the friends that they do have. And one of the things in that second half is about they're hitting 40 and they realize their friend circle has shrunk a lot because they don't have any kids. And this is brought on from the horror of that my students think I have no friends, which is, okay, they're a fair point, but they're like, oh my God, why you have no friends? They think it's like a terminal, condition. So it came from that every year I realized that, I was reading, when I'm workshopping stories, like every year I'm reading like 100 student stories. And do you know how many of them are on friendship? Pretty much all of them. They're on the friendships that they have with their roommates. They're on, like the friendships that they had as a kid, losing a best friend. None of them about their parents. All of them about friends and that important period of time. And I'm so grateful to, teach them those things and read those stories, but it's such an important part of adolescence, of coming of age, of growing up. And I think about how friendship slowly changes if you don't sort of, marry, have kids, and sort of do that thing of, oh, these are my mom friends, these are my dad friends, these are my parent friends, like things like that. If you don't go beyond that, how that really changes the structure of the family. And I think Sigrid, thinks about that too, because she also sort of has a non-traditional family structure, and what that means to kind of find friends later on in maybe an unconventional way. I don't know. I mean, I'm so envious now. I don't say this lightly. I'm so envious now of people my age who have siblings, like how built in that friendship is. Even if they didn't get along for a long period of time, that built-in friendship and family bond that I never have. So I think I write about friendship through this window of longing, that I want this like permanent friend forever, which doesn't exist because you lose friends all the time. And friends at the end of the day are just friends, because they have other tiers. But for me, it's really hurtful when I lose a friend, because I feel like, it's like your chosen person for a little bit of time.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a line in The Rental House that I keep thinking about, and I would love to ask you about it. You write after a meditation about Hamlets and the origin of the word Hamlet, home is not a given, and for many, a hard, sometimes impossible place to find. And I've been so haunted by that line, and I'd love to hear you talk about how that fit within the book.
Oh, yeah, I think about where is home. I went to 12 different schools growing up. You're the new kid 12 different times. Oh my God. I was born in China. My dad did a stint in Brazil, so it was just me and my mom. And then I went to primary school in Australia. Then I went to Canada. Then I was in Massachusetts. Then I was in Michigan. Then I was back in Massachusetts. I've been the new kid so many times that making friends is you have to have this skill, and you have to figure out where is home pretty quickly. And I think home for me in this story are people. It can't be a place. Because if I said home was a place, what am I going to do? Like take the dirt of my zip code and carry it somewhere? I can't do that. I've moved around so much that that's almost impossible. So for someone, I think about that word homeland, this idea that home has to be land. I don't know. I mean, yeah, a homeland is, where I made a home. But I have to believe that home are the people that you surround yourself with. Otherwise, it would be incredibly confusing where I would find that center, right? So New York is my home in the sense of it's my residence. But if I think about where is my home, that's so hard. I think it's with my family. It's with my immediate family. It's with people I spend time with. And I think sometimes it's in the classroom. I feel really at home in the classroom in terms of just being able to connect with people. I can't say that home is a place, right? Like the place where my parents live, it is my home, but I spent 4 years there in high school, so it's not like my childhood home. And so it gets a really confusing question where you're like, where do you feel like your ancestral home is? That's like so hard for me to answer, right? And I think that's hard for a lot of people to answer because I don't have a childhood home.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the idea of home being rooted in community.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about something we were talking about backstage, which is you have been wildly productive. This is your third novel, and also you're teaching at 3 different places this year. How do you balance work and creative work? Because I think that's something so many people are struggling with.
Well, I don't balance it. I try. It's kind of failed. I mean, I think you have to give up some things. Like I'm a terrible cook. But I could probably eat anything. You have to give up a lot of things, right? You have to give up some of your peace, quote unquote. Sometimes with the teaching, there is a lot of, as teachers, you give a lot of your time to other people. And so there isn't a huge balance, but honestly, I wouldn't say I'm happy. I'm not unhappy. I love what I do. I love talking to students. I like helping them. I like connecting with them. I really feel like myself in front of a classroom and in front of people and talking about writing. How I make time to write, I mean, you have to force yourself to make time for it. So sometimes it might be I get up at 6, I get up at 7, I put in 2 hours here, and then I carry on my day, or I do it on the train. The advice that I usually give students is you do have to be comfortable writing anywhere. It can't be an ideal place because ideals don't exist. So figuring out any period of time that you can write is great, even if it's 15 minutes. I have a friend who wrote her entire novel on her phone on the subway to and from work, and then she put it on the word processor. So I generally feel like if you're going to write, it will happen. You sort of just have to give yourself this opportunity to do it anywhere. It can't be this very delicate thing. And that's something Sigrid has always been very big about, that she was never like, writing has to be very, very precious. She always believed that if it's not working, it's not working. You sort of move forward. And she told me you shouldn't be afraid to knock down your house of cards, right? You build it up. If it doesn't work, you tear it down, and then you start all over. So one great thing was that she was never too precious about anything that she wrote or anything that we wrote, right? This idea that you're always trying to generate new material, and you see what clicks, and if it's not clicking, it's not clicking. But the thing is, she's always been, you have to be able to hear kind of a story has a heart, has a pulse, right? And that just takes time. That takes time to read and practice and things like that. So I think I try to balance it in terms of, when I have a break, I try to really have that break. But if I have the energy, I really try to give back because I think it's important to give back. Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. I want to make time for questions from the audience. This feels like a great room for pronouncements. So before we do that, I wanted to give you space to pronounce any books that you have loved recently that everyone should pick up in this room full of readers.
Oh, now we're doing it now.
We're doing it.
Oh my gosh. Okay. What have I read recently? Oh, I read this, okay, so it's a short book, and the reason I recommend short books is my students are always like, well, have you read anything really short? Couplets, a love story. It's a really good love story written in couplets. And I come to this, a friend recommended it to me because in the current book I'm reading about writing, this idea of, my editor was like, Weike, I think I need more feelings. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to go to Costco and buy some feelings. So poetry is a great way to figure out feelings, right? And couplets, the love story, it's just a love story that is in couplets, and it's very straightforward and easy to read. And I always recommend, if I can find a poetry book I like, I always recommend that, because I think poetry is almost, appreciation for it sometimes can wane, the sense of, oh, I just don't get it. But once you find a poetry book you really like, or a book of poems, it can be really impactful. So I recommend that, yeah.
Beautiful. Okay, it's your turn. Who has a question? Yes.
Hi, thank you so much. I write nonfiction, so I'm always really fascinated by people who write fiction. And your work, I love your books. I've read them all. I think they're wonderful. You write a lot about family. How does your family take it personally? Do people? What's it like to write these very intimate stories about family and marriage? And do you ever worry about how it will be received by your actual family members?
That's a great question. My parents have not read anything I've written. So they don't really read in English, so it's actually an interesting language barrier. That English is really my working language, like I work and write in English. So I'm not really worried about that. I used to be, but I'm not really worried about that. So beyond that, not really, because it's actually funny. I wrote this essay called "The Trouble with Friends," and I didn't name any of my friends in there. I just wrote kind of like my experiences with friendships and how they go up and down. And one friend got so mad at me, but I was like, this wasn't about you, right? So she had found herself in my essay, and I didn't even think that that was her. So it's actually interesting that you're most worried about maybe friend A thinking that you've written about her or them, but it's really friend C that is like, this is about me, and then you're kind of caught off guard. So I actually think it's hard to really convince someone that you are or you're not writing about them, because they could read into it, they could not read into it. And with that essay, because I didn't name anyone, thank God I didn't have to fact check them. I learned the hard way. I had written another essay about work, and I had to fact check something, and they actually called the person about this not very nice trait I'd written about them, and we're no longer friends, but I learned the hard way that if we're going to write something about this, I have to stay general, so I do stay general to not get in trouble with fact-checking. But it's weird, I'm not so worried anymore about people seeing themselves in this. I think one of the things I am kind of keen about is I fear everyone or readers think that this is my life, or every book that I've written is my life, just because I choose the Asian American female protagonist. And that's inevitable, but it's one of these things that I just believe in the background of that character. If I think about what Toni Morrison said, she writes to like a child her who wanted to read these characters, but she's not really writing herself in all of these characters, right? And so this idea of creating a protagonist, but giving them some of the traits that I have, but that they're not me,
Mm-hmm. Totally. I think we have time for one final question. Yeah.
Hi. I'm curious, you've talked about honesty, and you said Sigrid doesn't share her work, so maybe you do, but I'm wondering if you can talk about what it's like to share work, whether that's friends or partners or family, and being honest, and can relationships really sustain sharing work and critiquing and getting honest feedback, or what are your thoughts on getting feedback from people you trust and love?
100%. It has to be someone you definitely trust. There are certain people I do send to, and I do think Sigrid has a few people that she sends to that she trusts as readers. That's important. And I remember asking her this, and she says that she will email someone once it's done, but most of the time she just sends it out or sends it to Sarah, her editor. I think for few trusted readers is important, but I don't believe that you need to send it out to 15 people and get feedback. At a certain point, you'll know if it's good, you'll know if it's not good. I think it's totally healthy to share work, unless you're writing about each other. I was in a workshop situation where two people had broken up, and so they were both writing about the breakup from different perspectives, and you're thinking, oh my God, how do you even workshop this? So that is probably not as healthy. So similarly, right, two writers can't be writing about the same exact topic and sharing it. But I do think it's very doable in terms of sharing, or sharing snippets or things like that, maybe not the whole thing. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Weike, for your beautiful books in the world. Thank you for this conversation.
Thank you guys for coming. Thank you for the event.